region. And it's a fate that has to improve. Because my argument is going to be that if it doesn't improve, then I think we'll be in dire straits. Now, I'll offer a series of necessarily brief and seemingly disjointed reflections. Hopefully, they will together form a clear apology for the proposition that as a region, we should guard fiercely the right and opportunity to publish the work of our thinkers, our dreamers, our prophets. It's an apology for the great work that is being done, but it's also a challenge, too, for what more must be done. Part 1, Preserving Tradition. While I was a student at the University of the West Indies, I became deeply involved in the theater. Indeed, the theater helped to shape my literary life and gave me the foundation I would need to become the published author I've become. I recall being struck by a pattern at the Talawa Theater Competition, this contest that happened every year at Talawa. A number of plays kept being restaged year after year. It soon became clear, because I was getting worried about this, because we were doing original plays, but these other places were doing these plays, and they kept finding great plays. And I tried to find out where they were finding their plays. The whole Talawa thing was like secret agent stuff, people hiding plays, they can't come to see their rehearsal and so on. Well, a number of the plays kept being restaged, and it soon became clear that the halls of residence and the colleges and the drama society were getting these Caribbean plays from an existing body of work that was available and accessible. I soon discovered the extramural play script series, and I'm not sure how many of these plays existed, but I suspect that they numbered at least 25, perhaps more. Most of them represented plays written in the 50s and the 60s. Errol Hill was very responsible for the creation of that series. They constituted tangible evidence of a West Indian theater tradition, a tradition that could be replicated again and again through new productions of old scripts in an area like theater where everything is transient, where everything is focused on the moment, and where theater practitioners are notorious for being horrendous at keeping records of what they have done. These few plays constituted a strange and remarkable lifesaver. It is through this series that I discovered the plays of Roderick Walcott, Derek Walcott, Errol Hill, and so many others. They were unremarkable booklets, pamphlets even, when you looked at them. They were cheaply produced, but once the series ended, their value became grossly apparent. A handful of plays are available in the years of 1970, between 1970 and 2013, that's today. In many ways, I call those kind of dark years in West Indian drama. And I'll tell you why. Simply because the evidence of its existence and power does not constantly exist. Great shows have happened, but we don't have a record of them. A handful of playwrights have been published, a handful of plays are available, and hundreds of important plays have disappeared. Publishing plays may seem like a fool's errand, an economic wasteland. Who buys plays, after all? But when we fail to publish our plays, we fail to ensure that our writers grow, we fail to have perspective, we fail to value great work, and we fail our culture in remarkable ways. We are forced to constantly reinvent the wheel, starting from scratch, imagining we are inventing something new, and thus finding ourselves either stunted in our development or building our models on the work of other traditions. Tragically, our great artists, our remarkable playwrights, have died quietly and without the kind of respect they deserve. And our theater, for all its claims to newness, is the worse for it. This is why publishing is necessary. Sometimes publishing is about archiving our culture, preserving a body of knowledge upon which other generations can build. Filling the gap. About 9 months ago, I stood in front of an illustrious group of individuals at a fancy $1,000 a plate dinner in New York, and I made a pitch. I said, "Today, there does not exist anywhere a single press that is devoted exclusively to the publication of African poets. Not one. I said a handful of presses will occasionally publish African poets, but they are both rare and largely regional. As a result, it is so difficult to even begin to have a command of what exists in African poetry. And by African poetry, I mean poetry written by African poets. At events like Poetry Africa, a great festival that happens in southern Africa, books are not as important as CDs and reputations. I then said, if there's anyone here who believes that there should be at least one press committed entirely to publishing African poets, please see me afterwards. Most people avoided me. But that night I received a commitment of $35,000 to start the African Poetry Book Series and fund from a single donor. This is not a money-making venture, this series. It is a venture to correct a travesty. It is a venture to ensure that at least in one small way, the important legacy of African poetry is given priority and value. In 2014, there'll be 4 new books of African poetry. There'll be 6 new chapbooks of African poetry. And there'll be at least 1 anthology of African poetry, all coming out of this small fund. This will continue every year after that until we have a strong body of African poetry. And this is being done in conjunction with a university press in the United States. We're paying for everything. Reggae. Now, I've always found myself going back to the phenomena of the explosion of reggae music in the 60s and 70s, and how we saw this music form become a world-class music form after beginning as a cottage industry. It is a saying that Colin Chana and I share with each other at each crisis moment in any work that we're doing. We always say, go back to reggae. Go back to reggae. The 1970s produced an amazing array of musical excellence that cannot be denied. It is not that people were more talented then than they have been at other times. Here's what we must study more carefully. We must study the studio system in Jamaica at the time. It was exploitative sometimes, often abusive, and at times deeply oppressive. But as more artists began to take control of the studios, it became clear that the studio system was one in which high standards were set. There were expectations. There was a mentoring system. People could actually say, I idiot music that. There was a system of peer review. There was a sophisticated set of rules that allowed a work to increase in innovation and skill, and yet to have clear appreciation of tradition at the same time. Where the studio system thrived in Jamaica, for instance, we struggled to create a studio system for publishing books. There were few attempts, but none of them lasted. The reggae industry had the advantage of successfully finding a market and creating an economic model that engendered high standards of performance. Publishing is not the same as running a studio, but we can learn a great deal from the model of studio system 70s. The system combined a brilliant balancing act, looking inward and yet looking out. The music sought to compete on the world stage while seeking to succeed effectively locally. This has been the challenge and also one of the successes of the University of the West Indies Press. But it's a model that has to be stretched across all publishing in our society. Some artists did not make it outside of Jamaica, and others did not make it in Jamaica, even as they succeeded abroad. But what was rarely in question was the desire for innovation, creativity, and excellence among the best of these artists. So which brings me to the next chapter of my little talk, which is self-publishing. You hear a lot of talk about self-publishing. Everybody wants to get self-published. You've got $3,000, you can self-publish. Anybody can do it. Well, I've heard it said that the new excitement in Caribbean publishing is the advent of the self-publishing phenomenon, the vanity press revolution. It has been said that this is ensuring that books are published and that the range and scope of these books is remarkable and important. It is said that now anyone can have a book, and this excitement, this new frontier of publishing is breathing new life into books and reading. Perhaps. But I think that those who think that this phenomena is a fit replacement of the traditional publishing system are mistaken. They are mistaken because they do not understand the importance of the editor. They do not understand what it means to have proofreaders wrestle for extended periods about the relative merits of using a semicolon or a comma. They do not understand just how much editors sharpen work to produce work of the highest literary standards. They underestimate the importance of setting high standards of artistic merit in the production of books. If we think that our future in publishing lies in self-publishing, then they have accepted the arrogance and hubris of people about what they know and how much they can control the world simply by having the money to do so. I really think it's a problem. Right? It's, publishing is a very vain exercise, You write something and then you say, let's do 3,000 of those so that the world can see it. I am that important. But you decide that you are that important. That's the height of arrogance. So we must accept that. But at least in a context of traditional publishing, somebody can say to you, you're not doing that well as you think you are. At least somebody can come back to you and check you to make sure that what you're putting out is of a high standard. I adore editors. They are like, I love them. Oh yeah. Editors. Anyway, don't let me start. I really, really, really respect them. We need editors in the Caribbean. We need editors, good editors in the Caribbean. We need skilled, brilliant, engaged, and committed editors who understand language and understand topics and know how to make work shine. We need editors who will challenge writers, question what they're saying, and pushing them to say it well. We need editors, copy editors, proofreaders, teams of designers, publicists, and other thinkers looking at the work as something that has to be treated with care, respect, and intelligence. No self-publishing phenomena is going to substitute for this. In the Caribbean, we cannot afford to lose the conventional publishing model. We can't afford it in the newspapers. If you see problems in a newspaper, it's the editors. It's not the writers. Problem right now in our publishing, in our newspapers, is that the writers are trying to edit themselves and are failing woefully on it, but it's not their fault. They should have an editor who says, no, go back and fix this. I'm just saying. It's all about the money. That's the next chapter. In light of what is at stake in this business of preserving, challenging, and advancing our cultural assets, the peculiar insistence that all publishing has to prove itself to be self-sustaining economically is obscene. No doubt there is money to be made in publishing, and sometimes the pressure to think of ways to sustain publishing economically can generate brilliant innovation and imaginative efforts that, when all is said and done, can advance the very crucial goals of a publishing entity. So publishers do publish work so that others can read that work. This is true. The more people who read the work, the happier the publisher is, because that is what the publisher wants to do, to get people to read work that it values as important. But sometimes publishing is not about accumulating great numbers of readers. Sometimes publishing is about preserving the work of our thinkers and artists, not just for this generation, but for generations to come. Sometimes publishing is about reaching a small readership with work that is important. And we cannot assume that the market will always determine value. This is a foolish approach, and even the most market-defined cultures do not necessarily hold to this idea. Instead, they have constructed a new kind of economy of value. They have found ways to monetize, if you will, the whole idea of philanthropy, for example. They have found ways to turn the small independent project into something that has cultural capital and influence that is not as easily calculable in terms of money. There is a crude and juvenile attitude to the arts among so many of our powerful and wealthy in this country that is depressing. There is not enough imagination to see that even when the cash is not flowing in, something extremely valuable is happening. What I'm saying is that every effort must be made to try to protect the principle that sometimes publishing is first and foremost about the knowledge it preserves and distributes, and that may have to be at the expense of economic gain. Embrace the technology. For all my talk about conventional and traditional publishing, I should say that our contemporary publishing landscape is a dynamic and exciting new one, and one that we should embrace. In many ways, the advent of the e-book and the iBook, along with the reduced cost of production and publishing, offer great opportunities for publishers. And one of the areas that the Caribbean could lead in is in innovative publishing approaches. We must first recognize that the e-book is not a replacement book, nor is it a pretend book. It is a whole thing in and of itself. It's distinct from the other book. It's a different thing. There are things it cannot do that a book will do, and there are things that it can do that a book can never do. Rather than treat this innovative way of presenting information as daunting and something that is going to force us to enter an area that will be too challenging, we should embrace the challenge and start to think in multifaceted ways. The opportunities to create depth, dimension, intertextuality in the publishing world increase when we start thinking of the ebook. In so many ways, when an organization like a university press begins to bring its expertise in conventional publishing to bear on this new and exciting area of publishing, the result could be work of startling possibilities. And I actually think that these innovations will expand readership and enhance the opportunity for the publisher to attract the best writers and thinkers. So finally, things can be lost. Things can be lost. These last few days, I have been trying to do some necessary research on my family. I won't give you the reasons why, but after I'm done, then you probably will find out. It's a funny story, but I can't afford to tell it now. I've been struck by just how much I'm depending on published accounts of the lives of people on this island over a century ago to build a portrait and narrative of my family. Without these, they could be lost to me. Here's an obvious but often forgotten truth. Things can be lost. It is a truth that anyone who has worked in archives, in research, in libraries knows. Things can be lost forever. When I discovered that only one, as far as I've been told, one single taping of Ring Ding exists, I was appalled. Our radio and television stations routinely taped over the recordings of other shows to save money. For them, these were not moments to be preserved. They were disposable. We have lost so much because of this, and there's no way for us to retrieve any of this. There are plays we will never find. There are manuscripts of poems we'll never be able to read. In many ways, if we do not have the dogged commitment to retaining our culture, we will find ourselves living on fumes, as they say. I believe the future is an exciting one. But whatever promise there is of a thriving publishing enterprise in our region will rely on a dogged commitment to the model of service that is not predicated on the values of the marketplace, but on the values that enshrine the preservation of knowledge for the present and future generations. So I thank you for your patience in listening to me. I congratulate those authors who have won awards. These books that I'm looking at up there and that I've seen in my mailbox are beautiful and stunning books, and the press is very impressive. But there's a long way to go, and there's much, much more work to do. And I hope we'll see a great, great, great naissance of Caribbean publishing in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Like